I'm Cites, and today I'm going to do a deep dive into Chicana fashion to discuss its importance on Latina culture. I'm very excited to do this as I identify as Chicana and have subconsciously incorporated a lot of Chicana fashion staples into my own personal style. For me, it makes me feel more connected to my culture and is a way I can show love for it. I will dissect Chicana fashion through a historical timeline so one can better understand the importance of clothing for the Chicana collective. And since this topic can be pretty big, I want to focus more on the clothes and overall importance of the aesthetics through the decades. While this deep dive will focus on the Mexican American experience, Chicana fashion does go hand in hand with Latina fashion. An example of this is how hoops are a big part of Chicana fashion, but they're also important for other Latinas and Black women as well. Now, fashion has always had an essential role within activism that many people don't tend to think about. What we wear, especially as a collective, contributes to the broader culture of Latinidad. Clothing has value as a social medium, as it's able to communicate an aspect of someone's identity without having to say it. And fashion is what builds up someone's social identity, especially for marginalized groups who felt a lack of acceptance, so it kind of forces them to go out and create their own type of fashion codes. The Black Panthers, Young Lords, and LGBTQ groups are an example of some movements who utilize fashion into their politics. So let's get into the video. Roots in Mesoamerica. Chicanas have a connection to Mesoamerica as we are mestizas. Gloria Anzaldúa describes the mestiza to be sandwiched between two cultures. La mestiza undergoes a struggle of flesh, a struggle of borders, an inner war of our indigenous and Spanish makeup. The inspiration that has been taken from Mesoamerica has been from the
codices
and
Amoxtli.
don't know if I said that right. Vibrant colors are a major part of Mexican American culture. It's in our furniture, our art, our dresses, our textures, in our kitchen. It's literally everywhere. Mesoamerica is also where wraparound skirts and really big, loose clothing actually comes from. So this section has more to do with the traditional aesthetics that have been passed down from generation to generation, and it more so sets up the tone for how Chicanas reclaim their indigenous ancestry through fashion. 1940s and 50s zoot suits and pachucas. The zoot suits will forever impact Chicano fashion. The Chicano style vernacular actually starts during this era. Now this could be an entire video of its own, so I will focus mine on the Chicana version of the zoot suit. Say that one a million times. Zoot suits on men looked like this. Lots of swag. Now picture a woman in this. I'm getting ahead of myself. The tapered sleeves at the ankles made the pants perfect for swing dancing, a popular dance with the Mexican American and African American youth at the time. It was mainly worn by Mexican Americans, so obviously this made the suits un-American, deviant, and disgraceful. Anglo-Americans were so bothered by the suits, they basically attacked anyone who wore them. It was really bad. It was not a good time. But Chicanos continued to wear them. It was to make a statement. Okay, now let's look at women in zoot suits.
Slay!
They ate with this. If there is one thing Chicanas are going to do, that is mix masculinity with femininity. And this is especially important during this time because it was the 40s. It was very uncommon to see a woman go out of the feminine norm. Women in zoot suits were referred to as pachuca because it was a feminine version of zoot suits. So they would wear sweaters or large coats, over knee-length skirts, gold pocket chains, fingertip jackets, extravagant dresses, fishnet stockings or bobby socks, and platform shoes like Doc Martens. Good to know my Doc Martens are cultural. On top of the stigma that was already placed onto zoot suits, pachucas also had to deal with being deemed as juvenile, delinquents, or sexually loose because of their clothes, high hair, and loud makeup. Pachuca fashion also became an umbrella term for different Chicana aesthetics of the time. You know, women would find unique ways to express their own individuality. So subgroups such as punks, adelitas, and cholas started to emerge as styles of resistance during the 40s as well. Now, it's important to touch on, what was happening during this time period. So the US was in the middle of a war with troops heavily consisting of Mexican Americans, but at the same time, Mexican Americans were getting denied full citizenship and like acceptance into the country. So this style was huge in becoming a political statement of what Chicanas were experiencing at the time.
1960s and 70s Chicana feminism.
Again, this section could be a video all on its own, so let's get to the important stuff. Chicanas created their own form of resistance as an extension from the general Chicana movement. While the Chicana movement advocated for equality in schools, community, and pride for their culture, they ignored gender inequalities within their own community and treated Chicanas within the movement with a lot of disrespect. Chicanas were victimized first for being people of color and then for being female. They were further victimized for being poor and lower class. This intersection of identities influences the way that Chicanas are going to navigate, going about the world. And what better way to speak to the current political climate than none other than clothes? Many of the pieces that Chicanas were wearing at this time were inspired by the Mexican Revolution. So they wore brown berets and military-style type of clothing when it came to protests. On the other hand, Chicanas also started to wear pencil-thin eyebrows, dark liner lipstick, and even miniskirts and no bras to express political assertiveness and sexual liberation. Some snaps for that. This is also the time the label Chicana started being used a lot more by the people and into the mainstream. Now, the term Chicana self-selectively identifies a woman with a certain ideology, and this ideology demonstrates that she is critical thinking and politically conscious. Now, if we connect this to fashion, symbolism in dress is often unconscious, but a symbol used consciously can be more powerful to the wearer and heightens the effect that is being created. What I think this means for Chicana to kind of like be politically charged is because when it started getting used a lot more during the Chicana movement in like the 60s and the 70s, it was a way to explain what was happening in the real world. Speaking personally, because I do identify as Chicana, when I first read Gloria Anzaldua's book Borderlands, I was like, this is me. Like, this explains my identity, this explains how I feel, like, this completely changes, identifying as a Mexican American and then puts that into one word, Chicana. So it makes sense how labels can become powerful, and then at the time, Chicanas were also using clothes as a symbol of this identity and power. And I think the conscious use of brown berets, miniskirts, the no bra movement really sent the message. So when identifying Chicana fashion, the term itself encapsulates that this fashion is a part of something larger, and it kind of communicates Chicana's feelings towards what is happening in the world around them and how no matter what, they are here and this is who we are.
The 90s and the 2000s resurgence.
The 90s! Chicana fashion has stronger roots within the culture now. The big hair, red lips with brown liner, pencil-thin eyebrows, low waist pants, baggy khakis, hoops, white tanks, flannels with the top button in, and so much more. And as you can see from these pictures, it might make you nostalgic of what your mom or tias were wearing at the time. The style of this time, Chicanas really honed in on the chola style that emerged in the 1940s. This street tough style represented the shift in the feminine power struggle. And post-Chicana movement, feminist movement, Chicanas were finally seeing more social progress. So it makes sense that they stuck to an aesthetic that had deep historical ties to it. I know for me, this time period is one of my favorites for when it comes to fashion, but this time period is also when it becomes less Chicana fashion, but more so Latina fashion, carrying a layer of ambiguity with it. Now, media plays the biggest role here because of how they chose to represent Latinas. So movies like Made in Manhattan, From Dusk Till Dawn, Spanglish, J-Lo and Salma Hayek, my forever representation. And shows like The Secret Life of an American Teenager, Glee, Modern Family, and Euphoria. They all have this sassy, loud, sexy Latina character who never explicitly states if she is Mexican, Cuban, Puerto Rican, the list goes on. They were just a Latina character who essentially any brown girl could be like, yeah, that's me, because that was me. And Was this usually the best representation? No. Absolutely not. Media like this still depicted Latinas with the same stereotypes from previous decades of being incompetent, loud, working class people, or sexually deviant. But they looked great. So, through these characters, they have motifs that reflect the rich history of Chicana fashion. Thus leads me back to the point that I mentioned at the very beginning of this video of how Chicana fashion contributes to the broader culture of Latina fashion. One can't condense the Latina experience because it is extraordinarily unique. And I'm not too versed in other Latin groups' fashion history, but general Latina fashion does have similarities to Chicana fashion. An example would be obviously the hoops, but also like name necklaces. Culture is a major influence when it comes to clothing and style choices. Fashion has been able to capture the Chicana subject formation across historical and political moments. And because of that, we have strong fashion statements or fashion codes that signal to society an aspect of our identity. I tried to dress up for this video to really get this point across, but when you see me and the way that I chose to express myself in this video, I hope it signals to you that, well, without reading the title or watching this entire video through, that it signals to you that I'm Latina. And then if you know, then you know I'm Chicana. Does that make sense? Visually is the best way I can articulate my point on the overall importance of Chicana fashion. What makes it Mexican American is the certain styles or silhouettes like the big zoot suit pants, and that was a result of Mexican American discrimination and oppression, or how we use textures or bright colors as a connection to Mexico. Today, a lot of Chicanas incorporate 1970s, 60s, and 90s allusions into their fashion because it was an important time period within our history. It's a way to let new generations know that we've been here, we're here, and we're here to stay. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace.